These so-called national security concerns are in fact political dog whistles.
We're losing a lot of things to China and to other countries, and I think we want to see American built back again.
Could never ever imagine this happening in my country, in the United States of America.
We see a lot of abortion perspectives being censored. I think that's wrong.
Welcome to Our National Conversation, a podcast in which we discuss politics from all angles. We are completely nonpartisan, and all views, respectfully stated, are welcome here. Our podcast is unique in that it is hosted and run by students who are focused on finding solutions to the biggest problems facing America.
All right. Hello, everyone, and welcome to Our National Conversation. My name is Sam Taylor, and I am the Chief Operating Officer at the nonprofit associated with this podcast, Our National Conversation. Today, I'm joined by two guests. We're going to be discussing the recent student arrests, with respect to the pro-Palestinian movement and Trump's executive orders to crack down on anti-Semitism and the sort of crimes associated with it, whether that's applicable in this case, whether these are violations of free speech, that sort of thing. Now, the two guests that I have with me today are Chung and Tania Ortiz. The former is the Director of Policy Content here at Our National Conversation, and she's a self-described conservative and Trump supporter. And we have Tania as well, who is a progressive in many respects and is sympathetic with quite a few elements of the pro-Palestinian student movement. We're just going to be kind of diving into this issue and see where we get. I'm going to try to understand the perspectives that they're representing, and I'll offer, kind of contesting views, play devil's advocate, and just really kind of try to understand where we stand on this issue. Because Tania and Connor, even though you disagree on a lot of policy issues, I understand that there's quite a bit of bipartisan overlap on this particular subject. And kind of building off of our discussion last week, Connor, I want to dive into where this overlap is coming from and its interactions, obviously, with Tania's perspective there. So, Connor, let's start with you. Just give us a very general rundown. What is your reaction as a conservative to the recent arrests of pro-Palestinian students and concerns over national security, that sort of thing?
Well, I think it's abhorrent. I think a lot of these so-called national security concerns are in fact political dog whistles in order to silence dissent and essentially root out the enemies of a foreign nation, of Israel. We're often told that Israel is our greatest ally. If you've ever read, it's a wonderful book by Dr. John Mearsheimer and Tim Waltz. They co-authored it. It's called The Israel Lobby. And in this book, they go on to describe how Israel is in fact a strategic liability, has been for many, many decades now. Yet Americans support it out of a strategic or a perceived moral obligation. There really is no strategic benefit to support of the state of Israel. It's dragged us into multiple wars. It's only bred violence, death, and destruction, and endless power vacuums in the Middle East. So there's really no argument for involvement with Israel, for a very large Israeli lobby in the United States, which I think a lot of conservatives and also liberals alike are starting to question and say, hey, this is a foreign government and they have a lot of influence over our politicians and our domestic decision-making processes. And so you're really seeing the left and the right converge on this topic. Obviously, the left is flipping over the other side of the coin and saying, hey, there are gross human rights violations going on here. And they're right about that. This is essentially, it's an ethnic cleansing is what's going on in Gaza. But yet when student protesters try to say something about it or bring it to light, they're deemed anti-Semitic. And this is, it brings into it calls into question, what is anti-Semitism? How do we define it? And is it appropriate to label everything as anti-Semitism when in reality, these are crimes against humanity?
Right. Thank you for those points, Connor. Let's turn to Tania. As someone who, I mentioned earlier is a progressive with respect to this particular issue, I mean, how do you react to what Connor just said? It seems to me, as I noted at the beginning of this podcast, that there is, at least with, a portion of the conservative, kind of milieu and a very sizable portion of the progressive one, there's a lot of overlap on this particular topic. So maybe dig into that and whether you agree with what Connor just said.
Yeah, I definitely do agree with what Connor has said of the actions the US government is doing to censor free speech. We have to recognize that once, even a foreign national, once they step foot into the United States, they are provided with the privileges that American citizens are, and that is freedom of speech. That is one of them. They are able to critique, they are able to say things they want, as long as, of course, we're not encouraging harm of others. And I don't think the speech we are seeing, these college campuses that are critiquing the state of Israel, like the government's actions, isn't intending to harm individuals who either align with that particular government or that nationality. So I am very critical of the, Department of Homeland Security and their take on it. They say this is a common sense security plan for them to be arresting foreign students who have made this critique, right? They're saying it is to protect American interests. This is not an American interest, this is Israeli interest, right? And I wonder just how far we're willing to go to protect our relationship with Israel and just further divide among Americans, right? And that brings us to the question of, again, what Connor said, what is anti-Semitic speech and versus what is free speech, right? In America, you can be critical of your own government and of other governments, and that should not get you arrested or deported. I don't think that's right. I think that is the government taking advantage of its powers and, putting educational institutions in a very vulnerable position because it's asking them to align with the government. And what is that? Personally, for me, that's another step towards some sort of dictatorship or authoritarianship. We're seeing a lot of liberals say that the Trump administration is trying to do. And maybe that is one extreme viewpoint, but that is concerning. The minute we control or a government controls educational institutions and what they are able to think and produce in terms of knowledge is concerning. I don't want that. I don't want the government's reach in that. And I think this is one step to that.
All right, thank you, Tanya. You bring up a very interesting point there that this might represent one element of a slip towards some form or another of authoritarianism, or at least getting kind of closer to that. Now, I'm curious. I do have a few things to say on what both you and Connor have said, and maybe a few things to potentially contest, at least for the sake of the conversation. But before I do that, I want to quickly return to Connor. Um, Connor, do you think that that's kind of an accurate or justified read of the situation? I mean, even though you might disagree with the Trump administration on this particular issue, as a general rule, you've told me you love most of the Trump administration's policies. Do you see this as sort of an indication that the administration is moving towards elements of authoritarianism, or do you think this is more of an isolated issue that's just the result of our special relationship with Israel, the lobbies associated with that, etc.?
I think it's exactly that. I think it's the latter. I don't think that this shift in policy towards, quote, autocratic policy is unique to the Trump administration. I don't think it's unique to any conservative facet of American political life. That we saw the crackdown on students under the Biden administration. They gave it the go ahead. So I'm not trying to call out the Biden administration. I'm not trying to dig up dirt on the left here. That's not my intention. I'm just trying to point out that this is a bipartisan issue here. It's not a conservative tendency for us to do these things, and I think that the left should hopefully the sooner they can realize this, the better. That really this is a uniparty thing. I call it the uniparty because that's what it is. To me, over the last 30 years, it doesn't really make too much of a difference who takes office in this country, whether they're a Democrat or a Republican. For a large, largely they carry out the same agenda, especially when it comes to Israel. Like I said earlier, AIPAC purchases pretty much every single one of our politicians. So whether or not it was Kamala, this would have happened under Kamala Harris, absolutely, because not a single American politician will get elected and hold public office in this country without swearing loyalty to Israel and Israeli interests. And so what you're seeing is, American resources, American tax dollars, American effort being put into rooting out the enemies of a foreign nation, of taking care of Israel's problems for them. How is it America's problem that whether or not these young ideologues on college campuses are protesting what they view as a noteworthy cause in the Israel-Palestine conflict? What difference does that make to American interests? It doesn't. There is no connection to American interests there. It's what this is it is definitely in the best interest of the state of Israel that these college students are silenced, lest they, God forbid, they spark a wider social movement, an anti-Semitic social movement that spreads even more anti-Israel sentiment, which is a massive problem. The way I have a very realistic and pragmatic view of the American-Israeli relationship, and the way I see it is that Israel is kind of a leech state. They leech off of the United States, and they've been doing it for decades and decades. We essentially keep them alive on an IV, and we, via APAC, they're able to they're able to secure for a pretty cheap dollar the entire American government, and thus tens and hundreds of billions of dollars in military aid. We fight their wars for them in the Middle East on behalf of Israeli interests, and so they're buying it. They're buying that support for cheap. And what they don't want, what Israel doesn't want, is for a massive anti-Israel wave, anti-Israel sentiment to sweep across the country and erode that public support that they've enjoyed over decades and decades and decades. Because if politicians in this country come under too much pressure, and that's what it's looking like, as soon as the baby boomers die off and they're gone, really, they're the last bastion of like pretty much just unquestioned, unfettered support for the Jewish state. And the young people in this country, both conservatives and people like you on the left, Tanya, are starting to understand this, that it is not in our best interest to support the state of Israel. It's a liability, and people are upset that American resources are being directed to root out enemies of a foreign nation, especially when the Trump administration promised us America first. Mind you, I'm upset because deportations have actually mass deportations, which we were promised, of illegal aliens in this country who need to be sent back, have ground to a screeching halt, so that ICE and other law enforcement agencies can focus their efforts on monitoring and tracking anti-Israel sentiments across the country, and pro-Palestine sentiments, and finding these students, people who might be here on visas, and rooting them out and sending them back. So far from taking care of illegal aliens in America's problems, we're actually it turns out to be an Israel first administration, this Trump administration so far.
So, Tanya, just going back to you really briefly before I get to my two original thoughts there, because I want to make sure that your guys' ability to discuss your views and how they interact is our main focus here. Do you have any thoughts on what Connor said there? This idea that this isn't really an instance of the Trump administration slipping towards authoritarianism, but is more of a result of things like AIPAC, the United States special relationship with Israel, that would apply, across party lines. It doesn't really matter which president is in office there. What's your thought there? Is your mind changed on anything, or do you have anything to contest?
I think that even when the Biden administration was doing these actions, deporting students because of their critique or arresting students because of protests, was also a horrible thing to do. I also made comments that this is giving autocratic behavior, right? It's giving authoritarianship, which means it's giving, I use a lot of slang, my bad. I'm brain rotted. But it's just a horrible look for the administration to be doing things like this when it is invested in American interests. This isn't to protect American security, it's to, again, to protect the relationship with Israel. And I think that this America First narrative that we see that the right has introduced and produced is also what we're also seeing in some liberal parties, right? I do have liberal friends who are saying we just want to see the administration is actually focusing on American issues at this point. Because I think they're also getting tired of the fact that we keep supporting, keep feeding into these issues abroad while we continue to suffer, right? And we diverge when it comes to these issues of immigration and issues like that. But I do think both parties want to bring focus back on what America is facing, right? There's issues of poverty, of homelessness, of drug addiction. You know, there's broken families. You want to see what we can do to fix that, to bring America to the level of prosperity it had before, which we don't have anymore. We're losing a lot of things to China and to other countries, and I think we want to see American built back again. But I think at the what the Trump administration is focusing on now is not what we need, right? We don't need this hyper focus on what visa holders are saying and critique to Israel. I don't think that should be a focus the Trump administration should be doing. How about you focus on why I can't afford to buy a house, why it's so hard to pay back student loans even though I'm paying every month? Why do the rates keep going up? Why can't I even afford to buy a car? Why are eggs $12.99 in the state of California, and particularly in Riverside County? Why are they $13? Let's be serious. Like, there's something going on that's not being communicated to the American public, which is just feeding into the levels of high anxiety and stress, right? Which we don't need.
Got it. Lots of interesting points there. I mean, even if this isn't like an indication that the administration itself is, slipping more broadly into authoritarianism, it might be, just an authoritarian-esque action that could apply, irrespective of what party is in power. So I think that's a good point there. And I do think that you're right. There's probably a major disconnect between the sorts of issues that gain substantial media attention and gain the attention of a lot of our government resources, and those that maybe the everyday American is really worried about. At the very least, there's probably a disconnect in media representation for those sorts of issues. So let's go back maybe to kind of 2 points that I wanted to bring up here. I'm doing this kind of for the sake of the conversation to make sure that we're representing a variety of sides fairly here. I'm going to try to, I guess, apply the principle of charity to what the Trump administration is doing here, and I want to see how you guys react to that. So what I have heard, well, sort of 2 points I want to make. The first is that what I've heard from the Trump administration thus far, specifically from Rubio, is that this isn't really an issue of free speech or censoring speech that the government doesn't like, etc., but it's really about looking at a student movement that is engaged in substantial vandalism or crime, harassment, intimidation, etc., and then taking a look at people within that movement who are visa holders, green card holders, etc., who, if they had said in their green card or visa applications that they would be participating in a movement like this, the United States wouldn't have granted them sort of that residency. And so now they're going back and kind of revoking the green cards, etc., or at least looking to see whether they should do that. They're detaining people while they make those determinations, etc. And so maybe there's a point to be made there. Maybe this isn't a speech issue per se, or an issue of a kind of doing Israel's work to silence opposing views here, etc., but just more focused on domestic security to the United States. Another potential point to bring up here is that maybe the government itself has more information than we do on this particular subject. I mean, we'll have to wait and see. But right now, all we have are like social media posts, articles that these students have written. Rumeysa, Ozturk, and Mahmoud, Khalil, who have made statements in support of kind of Palestine and critical of Israel. And if those statements alone are what the government is using to detain these people, then yeah, absolutely, it seems to be quite unjustified. But maybe there is something more where we're just kind of going off of the idea that It's just these statements that are leading the government to kind of detain these people. But to my awareness, that hasn't been confirmed at this point. That's just sort of what we have to go off of right now. Um, and then I do have one other potential point to make here, but before I do that, I just kind of want to get your guys' reaction to that. This isn't necessarily, my view, but this is a view out there, and this is what the Trump administration is putting out there in public statements. What's your reaction to that sort of, I guess, take on the situation?
Well, I'll say I don't think that I really don't think that any of these national security concerns or uh, you know um, whatever domestic concerns of domestic terrorism, I don't think they really hold any weight here. I think in reality, I think these are dog whistles that we use to clean house on behalf of Israel. Because, well, when you take money from a lobby group like that, especially when they pay for your election in the public office, I think these are the things that you sign off on. That if X, Y, and Z happens, that you'll say X, Y, and Z. That's kind of what you're under contract for to say. So I think Rubio was always going to say it, all these other guys were always going to say these things. I don't think that these students are a danger to national security, and I don't think anybody really, feels that that's the truth, right? In reality, these are young college students. They're full of idealism, and they're protesting what they perceive as a grave injustice, which indeed it is. I'll agree with that for sure. What's happening in Gaza is it's a human tragedy. Um, but no, I don't think that any of these reasons that are being touted are are worthwhile or hold any real weight. That being said, I think that if you are here on a student visa, if you're here if you have temporary residency or whatever it is, I think that you have to be careful. I think a lot of people come into Western countries, and this is something I don't agree with. A lot of people come into Western countries because of these porous open borders policies, these internationalist policies that have been pushed over the last 30 years, especially in the last 10 to 15. And people are coming from all over the world, and they set up shop and they just immediately start. They come from the third world and they start criticizing the U.S., or they start criticizing Canada or whatever European country they're in. And I spent almost 4 years in Canada, and I always tried to refrain from commenting on Canadian politics or whatever I might have believed to be an injustice committed by the Canadian government, because it wasn't really my place. I'm not a Canadian citizen. I was living there, but I don't really think that gives me the right to kind of go out there and point fingers at the Canadian government and say, "Oh, you need to do better at this and that." It's um, I don't know. It doesn't sit right with me. If citizens, and this gets into the question of what citizenship is, and I think it's important, and I think the value of citizenship needs to be restored. If you're a citizen, you have a stake in this country, and I think that then gives you a right to go out and to really heavily, at least heavily engage in civic engagement. But otherwise, I do think that some of these students were really asking for trouble. Maybe some of them didn't know. I mean, as politically involved as they are, I would like to think that they knew that uh, the Israeli lobby holds a very strong grip over this country, and that if you spark a movement as big as the pro-Palestine movement, then you're probably going to face some serious backlash. That's probably going to bring your student visa into question there. So yeah, it doesn't surprise me that it's happening, but again, you're not a citizen, so I can't really argue against these people being deported at the end of the day. Is it wrong? I don't know. I think it's kind of I think it's maybe a little mean, but my real concern would be if these things were happening to citizens. I'll be very alarmed if the administration starts targeting Americans and punishing them in some way for speaking out against Israel or attending a pro-Palestine movement.
So really quickly, and then I want to get to Tania's reaction there. But Connor, I just kind of want to clarify something to make sure I'm understanding you correctly. Because when we started the podcast, if I recall, you had said that your reaction to kind of detaining and likely deporting these students. I mean, that's been halted at this time, but we'll see what happens. That in your view that was abhorrent. That this is something you criticize very heavily. You don't like, but now are you walking that back and saying, well, they're on visas and or green cards, so I don't know that I can really critique that anymore. Because in the United States we do still have plenty of regulations that you can essentially revoke or deny a green card based on okay, do they have like substantive ties to a terrorist organization? The Secretary of State can deport someone if they are suspected of or are believed to pose a substantial threat to the United States foreign interests, things like that. But I mean, ideally, at least in the judiciary, these would be pretty substantive things to demonstrate. And obviously the laws of the United States, Bill of Rights, etc. With maybe some differences with due process and things like that, but for the most part have been upheld by the Supreme Court as applying to citizens and non-citizens alike. So I don't know, just maybe walk me through that again so I can really understand kind of where you stand on this issue and whether you are walking anything back, you'd like to clarify anything further, just anything at all there.
Yeah, maybe a little bit. I mean, I guess what I really view as abhorrent is just the crackdown on free speech and the what is it the taking action against anti-Semitism, the executive action that was passed. That sort of stuff really alarms me. And well, yeah, the fact that it was being applied on college campuses, and they were essentially trying to shut these movements down, and preventing the people from having a voice, regardless of whether they're foreign nationals or not. I think people are looking at these couple cases here and there of foreign nationals having their student visa status revoked. I almost had mine revoked in Canada because I don't share the same privileges as Canadian citizens, and I had to be really careful about what I did up there. So I mean, I don't know. I guess I'm kind of indifferent about the young students who are having their visas revoked. Like, is it kind of sad? Yeah, I don't know if I would have handled it differently. I mean, I guess at the end of the day, the U.S. government does have a right to say, well, if you're going to be here on a student visa, it's a privilege to be here, and if you're going to be involved in essentially political agitation, whether or not the public agrees that Israeli interests are U.S. interests, that's a different question. But at the end of the day, the government stamps your visa, and if you're engaging in political agitation against U.S. interests, then yeah, I mean, I kind of saw that one coming. I do feel for them, I guess, because I was a student in a foreign country, and if Canada asked me to leave for some reason, I would have been pretty sad. So I can sympathize with them to a degree, but at the end of the day, I think that most of them probably understood the risk that they were taking, being here on limited parameters on a student visa.
Yeah. Though I know Khalil in particular at least was on a green card. So he had gone a little further in the process there, but I mean maybe some of those same concerns apply. I don't know, Tanya, what's your reaction to what Connor's said here and kind of the clarifications that he's made?
Yeah, so I think citizen or not, visa holder or green holder or not, I think that pe individuals like Rumeysa, Ozturk comments on the critique of Israel's actions is not justification enough to deport her or arrest her and take her out the country. I think what we see the Department of Homeland Security is conflating that critique to be anti-Semitic, to be domestic tourism, to be supporting Hamas. And that's just not it. And that could be because of the whole Israeli influence in American politics. And that's a horrible thing. I think that people come to the United States because of the privileges we provide them once they step foot in the United States, right? I think that if we were just to say, well, like, what do you expect? It's reflecting how our values are changing, our perceptions of free speech, our perceptions of Visa card holders and green card holders are. And I think that's a mistake. I think that's a turn that is gonna hurt us in the future, right? I think that even if Rumeysa was a visa holder, and visa is a privilege, 100%, I get where Connor's coming from. It is a privilege, it's not a right. I understand the United States um has to make sure that people relating to the country are actually going to be helping our country. Aren't trying to bring terror right into our country. I get that. However, I don't think this constitutes as terror. I don't think what they did, the students who what they did constitutes them being deported and taken out of the United States. I don't think it does that. And I really don't agree with that. I think that they have to really explicitly show me how the works done by Rumeysa Ozturk means support for Hamas and means domestic terrorism. I believe as an American, I deserve to know that because if I don't get the information, I'm set to assume certain actions and behaviors, right? And if we don't want those assumptions, then the justification needs to be laid out for me. And maybe that's my own privilege as an American to have that belief that the government owes me that. That's their undue burden for that, to prove to me that they had justified reason to do that, right? But maybe that's my own twisted perception as an American, right? But I think that this is just I'm expecting maybe in down the road to see American citizens be fined or harmed, but maybe that's an extreme perception. I'll take that. But I do see that as the future because we're so intertwined with Israel. What's not I could only just expect that to happen. What's preventing them from doing that? I think this is one step, especially since the recent crackdown on universities funding. Trump administration sent over 60 letters telling administrations if you don't crack down on these protests, we're going to take your funding away because you're creating an unsafe environment for your students. That's one step. Then we see Colombia rescinding degrees of American citizens because of the protests in Hamilton Hall, I believe, or Hamilton something. But that was because of Israel-Palestine protests, right? It just showing me there is something that's going on, and this is just what we're being shown, right? But I think ultimately I don't think we can accept that. I really can't. I need to see justification laid out. I really do. But I understand how a visa is a privilege. It's not a right. It could be rescinded. Of course, if they do harm, I don't think this is harm though. Yeah, but
Yes.
yeah, if I were in Canada, I would critique. But that's my privilege as an American. I have that sort of twisted perception because when I was in Japan, I did a critique of the government on camera. They did a broadcast, and I said I'm being critical of what's going on right now because I don't know. I maybe that's my conflated sense. I carry on that privilege to other countries, but I think if I'm living there, I do have a right to say something. And if they deport me because of that, that's a reflection of a problem they have going on in their government.
Yeah, so again, just to make sure I'm kind of understanding what both of you are saying here. So Connor, you're, again, kind of saying that, okay, visa, green card, it's, a privilege, etc. And if you engage in political agitation in a country as a result of having that, well, while you have that, then you're on pretty shaky ground there. That's not something that you would do personally. And, so you can maybe you're sympathetic for these people, but you can understand that okay, the government is able to step in and deport these people, etc. But Tanya, you're making the point that we still do have guarantees or protections for free speech, and these do apply based on numerous Supreme Court rulings. I can actually list a few of them if you guys want. I included these in my notes. These are things like Chu v. Colding, Matthews v. Diaz. Those are 1953, 1976. Zadvidas v. Davis, 2001. Apologize if I butchered pronunciation, but things like that, where there are quotes where the Supreme Court essentially says, yes, a lot of these rights apply to people irrespective of immigration status, etc., though elements of due process may vary depending on the context. So I think that both of what you're saying here, there's elements of truth there, but you're kind of drawing different conclusions on this overall situation on whether this is justified or not. I mean, I guess before we move on, just anything else you guys want to offer to further clarify your perspectives, or maybe interact with what someone else has said. And then I do have kind of a final subject that I want to end off on. But yeah, did I represent your perspectives appropriately? And is there anything you want to add?
I mean, yeah, I guess what I'm asking for the right to provide me with this sort of like, maybe it's a teleological perspective. Tell me how your action and its results still
Mhm.
justifies the action itself, right?
Yep.
Because the action of doing this with a visa holder and green card holder is resulting in, social consequences. We see people maybe get heightened states of anxiety, and not anxiety in the sense like, oh my God, I'm scared. No, 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 more so they're also now becoming afraid to be critical of the US government, and I wonder how much further that's going to go. Are we going to see people afraid to critique Trump or critique the Department of Homeland Security because, maybe they're a first generation person, right? Maybe my parents are immigrants. Am I going to be worried now, like, oh, you know, I'm gone for because a birthright citizenship. I'm gone. I wonder if it's going to get to that point because it's been contested already. Birthright citizenship. I think I'd be
Yeah.
grandfathered in low key because I already been here. But I think that's something that is a concern. I need to, you know,
Mhm.
that I guess the teleological argument is what I'm asking for.
Yeah. Well, and you want greater transparency from the government, why they're doing this, what next steps are, and a lot of that's very hazy right now.
Oh, 100%. But I also understand how that is and also could be an issue of national security. And
Mm.
maybe they don't believe what's the word for that? I require that, because there's a lot that we don't know. Sam, like you mentioned before, there's a lot that we don't know that we have to be like, oh, I guess we don't have to know. But I want to know. I want to know. Unclassify that information. I need to know it so I can make sure that these actions aren't being influenced solely because of Israeli influence. If it's can actually be shown to me that these individuals were actually explicitly supporting Hamas and explicitly fostering domestic terrorism in the United States, then I would say to the US, thank you for doing that. But they haven't done that. So I can only assume it's because of their current relationship with Israel that they are doing that. But I also understand what Connor said. It is a privilege to be United States. But I don't want my privilege to be dependent on the government's relationship and their want to keep a relationship with a foreign country. It doesn't make any sense for me.
All right. Well, lots of really interesting points. Thank you for that. And yeah, just kind of like we began this with, I think there's a lot of fascinating overlap here, but also important differences between your perspectives and the sorts of things you're emphasizing. So I find all of that very valuable. The thing that I want to kind of end off on today is, we've kind of moved around the topic of free speech, and what that should look like, et cetera. And I know that we're all either students or recent graduates or incoming graduate students, things like that. What do you, I guess you guys envision, and you don't have to outline, a perfectly delineated policy on this, but what are the sorts of things you want to see in campus speech policies, which are affected greatly by, what the federal government is wanting to implement, as we've seen, what the Trump administration is kind of agitating for and making funding conditional on. What sorts of free speech policies do you want to see on campuses and in American society more broadly? What does free speech mean to you? And I realize this is a very big, vague question, but I just kind of want to open it up to any further kind of final thoughts on this underlying subject. Connor, we'll start with you.
Free speech is it's it's free. It's got to be the freest of all the speeches, so to speak. It's I really am like a free speech absolutists. I think there are a lot of people out there who claim that they enjoy free speech and they like free speech, but um, they have this desire to quell or silence or mute speech that they disagree with, or I guess a better way to put it is a speech that they view as hate speech. Hate speech is probably my least favorite political phrase. Not because I don't think that there are hateful things out there. I'm not trying to give people a pass to say some really messed up stuff. But in in a in a country like America, and I'm really concerned about free speech in the Western world right now because it's been completely stripped from the Europeans. And I just listened to an Australian politician a couple days ago come out and give a press conference. It was the scariest thing I've ever heard, and I could never ever imagine this happening in my country, in the United States of America. And God willing, I don't think it ever will, because America's just different, and we don't do things like anybody else. We've always had a wild streak, and a defiant streak in us. But I was listening to this Australian politician say, well, so one of the reporters asked him something about, well, what about free speech? You just threw somebody in jail, or you're attempting to prosecute somebody, or bring serious charges against someone for a Facebook comment that they made saying that I don't like the Islamic migration that's happened in Australia over the last 10 years. We need to reverse it. I don't know if that's exactly what they said, but it was something that was labeled like racist and xenophobic, which I think are just dog whistles to like throw people in prison and silence what the global internationalist status quo views as like serious, legitimate threats to to the status quo of the last 8 decades, which is quickly and very violently unraveling as of late. And he said to that, he said, well, we don't have free speech like they have free speech in America because we believe that, protecting minority communities is more important. We live in a multicultural and a diverse and inclusive society. And having that means, that unfortunately, we have to prosecute people for the comments they leave on Facebook, because, this is saying that you want to reverse Islamic immigration is actually, that's actually in line with white supremacy, and we can't have that. So therefore, you have to go to prison where you can't, get back on your laptop and make a comment like that ever again. God forbid it influences somebody else to do the same. And you see similar things happening all across Europe where people are being sentenced in the UK for making similar comments. People are going not super lengthy prison sentences, but I watched somebody get sentenced for a Facebook post that they made disagreeing with the Islamization of the UK and saying, hey, this has been a Christian country for over 1,000 years, and we have to get it back to to what it means to be English. And I think he got 18 months in prison for that Facebook post. And that's highly problematic for me. Free speech, it's not there to protect the speech that everybody agrees with, or the speech that everybody finds nice and comforting and agreeable or politically convenient. It's there to protect all speech. And that means that it's there to protect, more importantly, the speech that's rude or just outright offensive, because the world is an offensive place. Okay. I mean, this ridiculous idea that, young people mistakenly believe in this country, more and more, it seems like to me, that they have a right, like a constitutional right, to not be offended, which I'm sorry, but that doesn't exist. Life is tough, dude. Get a hard hat. I'm sorry. I mean, people say stuff all the time to me in my adult life. Over the years, I can recall so many instances of people saying stuff to me that like really makes me like pretty upset on the inside, or that really like leaves me fuming, or things that I just find like outright offensive. That I could easily probably go and file a hate speech complaint, I guess, if I wanted to. But I'm a grown up. I'm a grown man. It's a part of being an adult is learning how to brush that stuff off and say, okay, there are always going to be a-holes who are going to use their free speech to try to get under your skin or say stuff that's just outright offensive to you, and you just have to learn to manage that as an adult. We can't live in this authoritarian state where anytime somebody's feelings gets hurt, or especially, I feel like racism is like being used as like a dog whistle for people who their skin might be a different color, or if they're a sexual minority or whatever it is. These racism and xenophobia is being used to eliminate political opponents, and that's not acceptable. So I'm a free speech absolutist, and that means letting ideas compete in the free market of ideas. So, if you're really concerned about hate speech, the free market solves everything, and it works in the metaphysical world too. You know, if people want to advocate for absolutely abhorrent or crazy ideologies that are harmful or non-inclusive or whatever you think it is, then let them do it. Let them go and preach their hate on the street corner. And guess what? In the free market of ideas, I think those ideas are going to fall pretty flat pretty quick, and people are going to publicly shame them. People forget about this, is that we don't need the government to put parameters on things for us and to say, oh, I'm here to shelter you and protect you, and oh, without me, the government, throwing people in prison for hate speech, you would be a victim of hate speech all the time and white supremacist speech and all this stuff. It's not true. In the free market of ideas, we have social mechanisms. Humans have social mechanisms to deal with these things. It's called public shaming. It's called ostracization. Excuse me. That was a mouthful. But yeah, that's how humans have always dealt with it. People who are out here preaching these crazy ideologies, they're going to fall flat quick. Nobody's going to listen to them. They're going to lose their friends. And their whole life is going to be turned upside down. And that's how, that's like natural selection, to be honest with you, in a nutshell. So I think we have mechanisms to deal with these things. Let the free market of ideas run and flow.
Thank you for that, Connor. And Tanya, I wanted to kind of pose the same question to you. Anything you want to react to with kind of what Connor said? Anything you agree with and want to build off on? Anything you want to kind of add nuance to or contest? Just anything at all. What does, I guess, to get back to the original question, which I think Connor answered very, very thoroughly there. Like what does free speech mean to you? And what sorts of policies or even just environment for free speech do you want to see on campuses and more broadly in America?
So I'm first going to talk about the campuses and just American society first in terms of where I see free speech, right? So on college campuses, free speech obviously should be protected. That means both from the political perspective, both left and right perspectives, I welcome all, right? And that is protected under free speech policies, right? Even the use of certain offensive words and phrases to convey political messages are protected within free speech, and that should then be protected in higher educational institutes. I think the censoring of certain political perspectives, especially on the more conservative side, we see a lot of abortion perspectives being censored. I think that's wrong. I think those protect perspectives and people advocating for them should be allowed to have spaces on campus to discuss that. I think that is protected under free speech. I think a good question to ask is what constitutes hate speech within free speech? Like, what separates those two? Because for Connor, from what I'm hearing, there are certain things that we call hate speech that aren't really hate speech. And I think we can agree with that. I think me saying, like, if I was pro-abortion, me saying pro-abortion is not hate speech against someone who had an abortion. That's not hate speech. I think me saying kill everyone who had an abortion is probably hate speech, right? There's a difference between that, right? But I think those things and those perspectives should be protected. I think in American society there needs to be a conversation for lack of better words, when does free speech end? When does it actually become harmful, and what does it mean for us? And um, does free speech apply to non-citizens? 'Cause I think that's a greater conversation to have. Like, are we allowing non-citizens to have the same privileges as we do when it comes to critiquing both the government and um, its allies? Like, are they allowed to do that like they have in the past? How are we changing our tune with that? That's a conversation we need to have as a greater society. But I think ultimately, what Connor said in the beginning, free speech is anything that doesn't abridge freedom of speech, right? Like, as long as there's no laws that abridge that, I'm full for it. I think, though, at the point where people are being targeted for specifically saying something that goes against a certain administration, that's wrong. And that goes for left, right, middle. I think that's wrong. So I think that's a greater conversation to have. And yeah, I think that we definitely have maybe play a little bit into this whole woke mindset, right? Where we prevent certain perspectives from having their time to shine, right? I think that's bad. I don't think that's good for higher education institutions to be doing that. I think be at the point where they are these producers of knowledge, they need to protect those perspectives, both on the left and the right. I think that if we exist in a knowledge society, we need to have the ability to have those perspectives here and thriving, right? But that's what I would say for what free speech means to me.
All right. Okay. Well, thank you, Tanya. Thank you, Connor. And yeah, I mean, I think at the end of the day, it's kind of a basic prerequisite for a functioning democracy. We do need to enable speech from a wide variety of perspectives. We can't, I guess, restrict or prohibit or censor something just because it's unpopular or we don't feel comfortable with it or we don't believe it or agree with it. I think that's all absolutely true. And I mean, that's the sort of thing that the ONC itself is very much committed to and kind of built off of there. I do think that we enter into this very complex legal situation when we start talking about, okay, where exactly does free speech end? Because there's sorts of speeches that we prohibit. You can't shout bomb in an airport is kind of the stereotypical textbook example. So where exactly do we draw that line in every single case? And in some instances, you can only assort that on a case-by-case basis in the judiciary. And hopefully we have norms and I guess a cultural idea of free speech that's strong enough to really resolve a lot of these issues. But I don't know that we have that in our current context. So I mean, I'd love to explore that more thoroughly with both of you at some point or other guests, but that's about all the time we have for today. So again, I just want to thank you for coming on, talking about free speech with me, talking about these latest instances of the Trump administration's executive orders, cracking down on students, etc. And we're just really demonstrating the overlap and the differences in your perspectives. I thought that was really valuable, at least for me. So again, thank you, and I think that's where we'll end things.
This podcast was brought to you by Our National Conversation, a place where students generate policy solutions to the biggest problems facing America. Join us in freeing political dialogue from hyperpartisanship. To learn more about what you heard today, check us out at ournationalconversation.org. You can also follow us on social media at Our National Conversation to show your support and keep up with our latest efforts.